much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here today, and it's been a pleasure over the past year to work really closely with Chris Nowitzki and everyone at the Fund for Lake George on a region-wide approach to reducing salt in the Adirondacks. Chris, both you and Eric mentioned this morning that you'd like to see the work you're doing become a model regionally and across the nation, and that's already happening. ADK Action works in the Adirondack Park. We like to say that we see a blurry blue line since a lot of our communities straddle the blue line there, so we work a little bit outside too to accommodate. But we wrote a grant in the springtime to the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute to take the MOU that the Fund for Lake George and the Save the Lake Partnership developed for municipalities to the entire park. And we were funded for that. So we're bringing the MOU to 102 towns in the park, and we're really looking forward to kind of collaborating to get the best practices that we've all been talking about agreed upon. Because I think it's common for us to see that sometimes there's some confusion or some disconnect when we try to decide on what the best practices are and in what order we should implement those. So we're leading a road salt working group, and we're going to have a meeting coming up this fall. I'll give you more information on that. But we're trying to really collaborate to get all those best practices agreed upon so that we can produce a document called the Roadmap to Reduce Road Salt, which is going to be really easy to understand with half-page summaries of the relevant local research in the Adirondack Park, a list of best practices in order from the cheapest and easiest to implement down to most expensive and difficult to implement. And we're going to distribute those widely across the park and work closely with folks to make it happen. So thank you very much for the great work that you've been doing, and thank you for providing a model to see how really awesome measurement and analysis can show us what we're doing well, how we can improve, and to spread that. So ADK Action started in the road salt game back in 2010, and that was before we were even a nonprofit. We were a political action group in those days. And I have a document that I brought for everyone to see today. There's a few copies in the lobby, and I've got a whole other box in my car that I'll bring out after. But it's a booklet, review of effects and costs of road de-icing with recommendations. So feel free to grab one of these. And like I said, if we're out, I'm going to grab more. But this document was produced back in 2010, but there's still a ton of really important literature review in here, and it can be a great document to bring to share with your crews. And we have worked with the Adirondack Watershed Institute, AWI, up at Paul Smith College extensively. They've been our primary research partner for 7 years now. And we have studies already done on Adirondack-wide application rates, both on local roads and state roads. We've also got source-identified surface water impacts. I'm going to share those studies with you today. We've also got ongoing research for groundwater. We're looking at aquifer contamination, and we're doing a well water study right now. And then finally, we're also in the midst of economic impact research, which has already come up a lot today. And it's been really neat to see the fantastic work that's already been done in that realm. And as Eric mentioned earlier, I can't wait to see how the Lake George information is going to extrapolate to economic benefits. Because, if it doesn't make dollars and cents, we're never going to do it. So, to bring it from this wonderful Lake George-centric area to expand and look at more broadly at the Adirondacks as a whole, we have about 10,555 lane miles of roads in the Adirondacks. If you can picture going from all the way from Alaska down to Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, that's how long our roads can stretch. So when you imagine applying all the salt and de-icing materials to that large stretch of land, it's an incredible amount. It really adds up. So in the Adirondack Park, we've spread about 6.5 million tons of road salt since 1980. The map that you see here shows the state roads in red and the local roads in black. About a quarter of our roads are maintained by the state, by DOT, and 3/4 are maintained locally. On the state roads, we're seeing about 108,000 tons of road salt used per year, and then about 84 on the local roads. So there's a few potential reasons for that. Oftentimes the speed limits on the state roads are higher, and they have different levels of service. So if you imagine Highway 87, for example, where we have people going from Montreal to New York City and wanting to be able to go as fast as possible all year round, of course, you could imagine that there might be more road salt used on a road like that. All right, so surface water. With the studies that we've done with Dr. Dan Kelting at Adirondack Watershed Institute, we're seeing that the majority of our surface water may already be contaminated by road salt. So we got some great information about the Lake George area and the streams here this morning from Dr. Sutherland, and this kind of looks at that on a regional scale as well. So we have 6,000 miles of streams, and about 52% of the total lake has already been shown to be contaminated by road salt. And then when we look at our lakes, 77% of the total acreage of our lakes already seems to be contaminated as well. So this is a regional problem. Just to put us back into reality and context of the country for a second, let's just think about how incredibly protected and pristine our park is. And when we can see that the Adirondack Park is having these kinds of issues, now imagine places that have much higher populations and how intense these problems can be. All right, so in the past, it used to be a common question: how can you be sure that the chloride pollution that we're seeing in our lakes can be attributed to road salt? It seems like nowadays we all understand, of course, it's the road salt, we get it, but this slide just speaks to the fact that we're quite sure it does, because if you look at regional salinization in water bodies where there's no roads, you see the background concentrations of about 0.5 parts per million. And in the areas where we have the roadways, we're seeing 14 times higher concentrations. So where there's roads near water, there's road salt pollution. All right, back to this is a source identified portion of our surface water research. And I mentioned earlier that we were seeing that the state ends up using more road salt than the municipalities. And this reiterates that. This was a 2012 study that we worked with Adirondack Watershed Institute on. And so as you can see, if you can read that chart, but just from the text is probably easier, there's no relationship between local road density and the chloride levels on a regional level. That's not to say that it's not very important that on a local level we continue to reduce. Obviously it is, and these numbers change all the time. But in our study of the entire park, we saw that there wasn't a huge correlation between the local road density and the chloride. However, the state road density explained 84% of the variation in chloride levels. So higher road density, state road density equals higher salt load. And we are working on we have a road salt working group that includes myself, Randy Preston, Town of Wilmington supervisor and Essex County seat, Chris Nowitzki, Lee Keat, and we've had wider meetings that have also included folks from DOT and from folks from Mirror Lake, some of which are represented here today. And we are working together to try to not only look at the Adirondack Park and work with the municipalities here, but also work with folks at DOT to see what we can do to support their efforts, because they certainly have reducing road salt on their radar and are working hard. And so we're trying to be a good partner in that way where possible. So stream baseflow chloride. This chart, I think, it really makes a point, but it can be misleading. What you're seeing along the bottom there, stream number, that's not, it looks like you have a really big increasing trend. But what's going on here is everything's already just lined up from lowest to highest. So notice that right off the bat. And if you look at the no paved roads section there, closer to me, you see that in the areas where there's no paved roads, we're seeing that there's about 0.5 parts per million of chloride, which is close to the background levels that we would expect. But then when you see the areas with paved roads, we're seeing anywhere between 3 and 195 parts per million of chloride. So 195 parts per million, that is a ton, right? Does anybody have a guess of where you think that might be? Which stream? Think it'd be somewhere populated, somewhere near a lot of parking lots? Well, surprisingly, it's Mountain Pond Stream, 3 miles north of Paul Smith's College. Tiny little place, middle of nowhere. There's nothing going on there, except it's near there's state and local roads nearby. And so it's very clear that it's, definitely the application from those roads. And groundwater, we have just scratched the surface with our groundwater research, but we think it's really important because obviously if we're contaminating our aquifers, that's a problem that our children and our children's children are going to have to deal with. If you think about road salt, the amount, I really loved seeing, by the way, a little bit earlier today, we saw that if we change what we're doing now, we have the potential to make a major impact on the amount of chloride in our waterways in the future. And we really need to do that because if we get this regional groundwater pollution, which we're already starting to see, we're going to have a problem that we can't get ourselves out of, so we need to start now. But what you see here in pink, you've got the unconfined aquifers, and in red, you've got the salt-contaminated surface water. And basically, it's pointing to the fact that regional groundwater pollution is a very high potential. And to study whether or not we are seeing that groundwater pollution and to what extent we're seeing it, we're working, again, with Adirondack Watershed Institute to do a study on 400 private wells. So the well and aquifer study it began earlier this summer, and the Fund for Lake George was a huge partner in that, so thank you. We're looking at 400, as I said, and they're broken down into wells that are affected by local road runoff, state road runoff, and no runoff whatsoever. I talked to Dan Kelting this morning, and as of today, we're up to 197 of those well tests are back. And because of the way that the study is designed, we don't have any preliminary results until we get all 400, because that's our statistically significant number. But that research is underway, and we hope that it will help us gain a better understanding of the severity of the groundwater pollution. And I'll mention that we're looking at both shallow and deep groundwater, because that's really important. Another area that we're looking at is the economic impact, and we're looking at three different ways of looking into that. Private vehicle costs, depreciation. My husband and I fly down to North Carolina or Florida every time we're going to buy a vehicle. I'm sure some of you do the same. They're so salted up here, and rusted out from the salt that it's kind of a waste. New York State Department of Transportation vehicle costs. We thought if we could try to show that it's costing more money to maintain the vehicles because of the rust and the corrosion, that could be something that would be motivational. And then we're finally looking at the roadway infrastructure costs. So we started the bridge deck maintenance and repair study earlier this year. And unfortunately, we just got results that the data that's available on that are not going to be conclusive. So we're scratching that portion. But we're going back to the drawing board with private vehicles and the New York State Department of Transportation vehicle costs. So I mentioned briefly earlier that what we're doing right now at 80K Action is working on a roadmap to reduce road salt. And basically, this is going to be about a 12-page document. The audience for the document is the municipalities and anyone who's responsible for applying salt. And so we're trying to make it something that's simple, that folks have time to read, that includes good visuals, something that has takeaways and can help people at Department of Public Works and DOT take a look and understand really clearly that we're seeing this surface water contamination, groundwater contamination. We'll include our results from the well study in there as well. And then after providing motivation from really helping folks understand what the problems are, we're going to have a clear list of those best practices that we're all agreeing upon. And we're going to arrange those from, like I said, cheapest and easiest to implement down to most expensive and difficult to implement. Because sometimes just knowing where to start can be a huge, you just have to start somewhere. And I've talked to a lot of folks in person who say that, they hear from some people that they need to go back to sand, and they hear from others that they need to do brine, and that it's confusing and they don't know where to turn. So we're hoping that this document will help substantially. We're also going to come out with some laminated posters for garages to just help it stay ever present in everyone's mind, that this is something we're all working towards together. And as I mentioned before, we're bringing the MOU model for a pledge to reduce road salt from Lake George to the entire Adirondack Park. Yeah, this is fun. Imagine that your chair is actually a time machine just for a second. Just close your eyes, feel it. Imagine that we're in the future. We've solved the problem. We've reduced road salt by more than 50%. We're all just, sitting easy. We know what to do. Well, we haven't talked to the driving public yet, have we? Something that I hear frequently from folks is that, okay, we can reduce road salt till we're blue in the face, but if we don't get people to change their driving habits or understand that they might have to make some small sacrifices if they really want to protect the environment, then we're not really getting anywhere. So we came up with this cheeky little idea, the Hold the Salt campaign, and I've got these car magnets here, and I've got a pack of them if anybody wants one. But the idea is to get people to think about the implications of oversalting our roads, to put this on their car to say, I think we need to use less road salt. But also when they put this on their car, they're saying, I think we need to use less road salt, but I also understand that that comes with some responsibilities on my part. So if you want more information about the Hold the Salt campaign or how we can reach the public together, please talk to me afterwards. Finally, like I said, we're trying to get more folks onto our working group. So if you're interested in tackling this issue at a regional level, feel free to contact me at this email address. And thank you.